Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Katie Hurdy. I'm on the product marketing team here at Miller Brown Digital. With me today is Alejandra Tejada. She's our mobile solutions manager. And today we're going to walk you through our new study called the New Mobile Mantra, in which we explore consumer behaviors and preferences across mobile apps and browsers. Just a few logistical things before we get started. We should have a few minutes at the end for questions, so if you have a question, please type it into the box at the bottom right of your screen. If we don't get to your question or you think of one after this presentation is done, you can email us at digitalsolutions@millerbrown.com and we would be happy to address it. This webinar is also being recorded, so you should receive it shortly so you can watch it again. And finally, you can download the full version of this report at our website, millerbrowndigital.com, under the Research and Insights tab. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alejandra, and she can get into our findings. Alejandra?
Great. Well, thank you, Katie, and good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast, and good morning to those on the West. As Katie mentioned, my name is Alejandra Tejada, and I'm the Mobile Solutions Manager here at Miller Brown Digital. I work very closely with our mobile data asset to build out our mobile capabilities and integrate some of our mobile data and insights to our core solution suite for clients and some of our key client deliverables. Again, welcome to today's webinar on the new mobile mantra. We're very excited to be here presenting to you today on the latest mobile research, and thank you for spending some time with us to hear about our findings. In today's presentation, we'll use the next 30 minutes or so to take you through the research on usage behaviors and attitudes of the mobile web and mobile apps. And we'll start first by covering some of the general observations that we've stitched together from the data, but then dive into some of the sector-specific findings on mobile usage. To kick us off, I'd first like to start by giving you some background as to why we decided to conduct this study, and specifically why we decided to focus on the app and browser channels. Ever since the mobile industry discovered that between 80 to 90% of time spent on mobile is on app, the knee-jerk reaction has been to focus all operational resources into building and allocating a significant share of mobile media spend to in-app advertising. While we agree that apps certainly play a very critical role within the consumer journey and especially within mobile engagement, we believe that there is more to this story. So in designing this research, we wanted to, one, understand if the browser is still a relevant and valued channel for consumers, and then two, explore if the relationship between apps and browser channels is truly that adversarial piece that we're kind of led to believe, or is it more synergistic to the consumers and to the consumer journey. So with that, we leveraged our behavioral mobile panel where we can see both app and browser behavior to take a holistic approach on understanding consumers' behavior on mobile. And what we uncovered and what we'll be sharing with you today is obviously, one, our findings on channel usage, but I think moreover, the implications of the different mindsets and circumstances, specifically preferences of this usage behavior for consumers. So with that, in 2012, that's basically known as that pivotal year within the industry, right? It's the year that mobile adoption hit a critical mass. 52% penetration within the U.S. according to the Census Bureau. And from that point on, and thinking really about where we stand today, the smartphone has fundamentally changed our lives, much like the telephone, TV, and desktop computers have. Obviously opening doors to a lot of the innovation, a lot of the efficiencies, and revenue streams that we see, specifically, with apps such as Uber and Level Up. So that points us to a point that, the mobile era has really arrived and has been here for some time. And this isn't groundbreaking news. It's something that we've heard of time and again. But if we take that perspective and then layer in some of the financial commitments to mobile by marketers, we found that on average, organizations spend $34 million annually on app development alone. And then projections for 2016 mobile ad spend among marketers is expected to be $42 billion. So total mobile spending could topple over into the hundreds of billions in the very near term. Considering that the amount of capital and resources allocated to mobile will continue to take a greater share of one's organizational budget, it comes as no surprise that marketers need to start building a more sophisticated and primarily effective mobile strategy. However, we know that this isn't easy and that the advent of mobile has come with a lot of challenges. Mobile is disrupting a lot of what marketers know already, definitely fragmenting the traditional consumer journeys. So we're kind of lost in this little shuffle of trying to understand where mobile is. And we're struggling to specifically quantify that impact of mobile, devise a response and a viable strategy to navigate with this new and ever-changing ecosystem. And we've generally taken the position that the complexities rest primarily on understanding the usage of mobile with other screens, such as using mobile while watching TV. And that's led us to overlook some of the nuances within the mobile platform, generalizing and simplifying the complexities that we see within the mobile channel itself, and then most notably of which is understanding the behaviors of the mobile channels together, which is the app and browser. In our research, we found that needs and preferences of consumers are not black and white, and therefore we shouldn't perceive that the usage of mobile channels should be that either. The overall learning from our research is that marketers must start orienting themselves not just to the channels that people use, but rather to what they're trying to achieve and why that channel, that specific channel, facilitates this task. I believe that through this frame, marketers can look beyond that app and browser divide and can better utilize mobile more holistically to acquire, engage, and elevate their mobile experience and their messages to consumers, to building stronger ties between their investment, their strategy, and that consumer experience. So we believe that by starting to ask the right questions now, to get at that right data in mobile, we can start building the foundation for an effective mobile strategy. So with that introduction, here's the agenda for today's call. As I mentioned, we'll first be covering general mobile behaviors, understanding the key instances of when consumers choose to access an app versus a browser. And then we'll dive into the shopping journey, taking you through some examples across industries. We'll review the following industries, spotlight some of the subsegments of each. So for example, travel will focus on hotel, consumer electronics, smartphones, telecom, wireless, and then lastly financial services, banking. And with that, it's really just to understand when consumers choose to engage with those industries through either app or browser or both. And lastly, we'll conclude with a recap from the study, specifically what next steps marketers should focus on in building their mobile strategies for tomorrow. Great. So before we dive into the findings, I want to start off by providing you with some specifics on the research data and where it comes from. So for the research, we leveraged Miller Brown Digital's proprietary mobile behavioral panel, and we paired it with the Mobile Attitudinal Survey. As some of you may be familiar, Miller Brown Digital has a 2 million person desktop panel, but we also have a 20,000 person active mobile panel where we track the actions of opt-in panelists, basically the actions that they conduct on their smartphone and tablet devices, and then we're able to see every app and site panelists visit along with some of the actions they take within those mobile properties. The panel goes through a process of bias removal, and panelists are more normalized to project the behaviors of the mobile browsing population. Generally, our mobile panel captures the behaviors of browsers and apps, but we also are able to capture the search queries, apps installs, uninstalls, as well as location and some telephone metrics such as calls, battery life, network, and such. For the purposes of this research, we analyzed the data within a 6-month observation period, so from January to June 2015. And then on the survey side, we fielded this survey to over 2,000 respondents within the U.S. who own and use a smartphone device. And the total survey time was about 15 minutes or so, and respondents were able to take it either on their desktop or mobile devices. Really, for the survey, we were looking to probe respondents on the behaviors, needs, and some of the preferences on mobile across various sectors, including digital news publications, which we'll get to in a bit. But specifically, the survey was fielded in August of this year. Okay, so I'll first be taking you through our findings on app versus browser usage. So when we started this study, we wanted to have a clear understanding of the behaviors consumers are showing on their smartphone devices. We looked at the top 30 mobile properties, which include Google, Facebook, Instagram, King Games, YouTube, Amazon, and the sort, and we wanted to know if we aggregate the top mobile properties, basically where the mobile browsing population goes every day. Do the majority of visitors use their smartphone primarily for apps, or is the browser still a very relevant channel in the lives of the consumers? And surprisingly, we found that smartphone users access apps and the web browser pretty equally. We found that 60% of visitors to the top properties visit via app, and nearly 60% visit via web browser. Even for social properties such as Facebook, where you would expect to find limited mobile browser activity, 37% of smartphone users reach the Facebook network through the mobile browser, and that's not a small percentage. I mean, Facebook is still primarily app, but then there is heavy browser usage too within that channel. And so this usage behavior also doesn't vary greatly by demographic segment. In the data, we didn't find any demo groups that predominantly skewed one way or the other when we aggregated the top mobile properties. Couple that with other usage stats that we see, we find that while apps have higher time spent and share of engagement driven by primarily Facebook and gaming apps, the browser still is used consistently by consumers. And I'd like to put time spent into context because I think it's an effective form of measuring engagement, but I think it's also important to qualify time spent a bit. If you think back to the desktop world, a mainstream method of engagement is page views, right? And while true, page views is a good metric to understand affinity to a site, it could also be a factor of bad UX or user experience design. Think back to one of those 1990s sites that require you to visit 10 times the number of pages you do now to get to the information you cannot get on site by just scrolling. If we tie this back into mobile, yeah, we can point to time on site as being a great indicator of engagement, but you must also think about the way that people use the mobile browser. When somebody uses their browser, their actions and motivations are more focused, more targeted. And utilizing time spent as a blanket indicator of channel importance looks to be just as one-dimensional as using page views as a KPI for desktop. So I think that's why it's important to view all aspects of engagement and consider daily engagement, sessions, and even frequency of actions within the fold. And so in our findings, 61% of smartphone users access their browsers at least once a day, spending an average of 31 minutes within the browser. And we see that this usage does vary by age group. For example, we found that 81% of females and males ages 25 to 34, the most of any demo group, are significantly more likely to access their browsers daily. And this is a prime audience that marketers would really be missing if they didn't have a cohesive browser strategy to target the segment. So when we initially started the research, our guiding question was, is the mobile browser still a relevant channel within mobile? And we found the answer to be a resounding yes. The browser still plays a critical role in the life of the smartphone user, but let's focus some time on the app, because I think through our research, we did find a lot of nuggets to help us understand the app environment. The app ecosystem is still developing, and it's pretty complex, and while we know that app access is abundant, we all obviously access apps regularly, we also know that not all apps need to or are accessed daily by smartphone users. In our research, we found that over 50% of smartphone users have between 40 to 70 apps installed on their devices. However, they only access 10% of their app repertoire on a daily basis. That's to say, 71% of users access no more than 6 apps in an average day. And this provides a big risk for marketers dependent on only an app strategy or are only advertising through apps, because unless those apps are in the foreground on a regular and consistent basis, it will be deleted from the device. Looking at the top reasons for why consumers tend to delete apps, the top reason for deleting an app is because it's rarely used. So it's not just about memory. Even if consumers have enough memory on their phone, 72% of smartphone users say that they delete apps because they're rarely used. The second cause is obviously storage limitations, and the third is battery life. It's also interesting to see that the spectrum of responses goes from hardly used to use way too much, with 8% of respondents citing spending too much time using an app for their reason to delete apps. So it seems kind of that people are trying to wean themselves off of some addiction to gaming apps with this stat. Other interesting data that also came out of this research that we saw was 41% of users on smartphones say they have apps on their smartphones they just don't use. Furthermore, 54% of people agree that they will only download an app that they know will be used frequently. So if you put all this into context, Google Play features 1.6 million apps and the App Store 1.5 million, with 60 apps on average living in a user's phone, and the user accessing on average between 4 to 6 apps daily. The hit rate of a marketer's app being downloaded and being accessed daily is less than 0.001%. So what's key here for marketers? I think that what's critical for marketers to understand is that consumers have a very limited app bandwidth. So while apps are still an important and pivotal channel and a point of access for many consumers, it's a very competitive space out there for mindshare and engagement. So shifting the focus from the mobile channels, we want to put the spotlight on context because we know that channels are equally important, but the decision to use them is based on personal context. In the study, we asked respondents which channels, app or browser, they most likely use to engage in a list of activities. Analyzing the results, we found that when we looked at industries that are primarily focused on acquisition, such as hotel or consumer electronics, where we expect to see heavy cross-shopping behavior, the majority of engagement actions took place on the mobile browser. In contrast, industries that require regular engagement or are based on a long-term servicing relationship, such as online banking or wireless, the primary channel to engage and take servicing actions are on app. This pattern in the research points us to two findings. The first, that the decision to choose an app or a browser to perform a particular activity depends on the task they're trying to achieve or the task at hand. The second is that the need to download an app to perform those activities is dependent primarily on frequency or repetitiveness of that action or task. So in here, I know that there is a lot of interesting data that you can start dissecting when you look at hotels and auto, but I'd like to hone in on one that I think is most striking, and that's of retail. If you look at the chart, 64% of consumers who shop on their mobile device say to engage with retail activities on their app. And retail, which many of you know requires a lot of cross-shopping activity and research across sites, is not generally bucketed as an engagement industry. We believe this to be driven by retailers, online retailers such as Amazon, that have set up their servicing model with Amazon Prime and have that app stickiness to increase the number of actions and time between actions that make the Amazon app specifically so vital in the life of the consumer. Other pieces that Amazon gets right, and to a point that's pretty scary for many of your wallets, and definitely would cause some regret among shoppers, is convenience. In our findings, we discovered that convenience plays a pivotal role in why consumers choose to perform certain activities on app or in a browser. When we asked respondents who selected mostly app and mostly browser for activities across industries, why they choose to perform those on an app versus a browser, or vice versa, what we found was that while convenience is a primary driver, it's not necessarily exclusive to one channel. The mere ease of access and navigation is among the top reasons for people accessing app and browser for their activities. 38% of respondents, as you see here, 38% say that mobile apps are easier to navigate, and similarly, 34% on the other side of the chart say that mobile browsers are easier to navigate. And that has led us to believe that convenience is really relative. It's really about the user's personal context and what's perceived as convenient for them. So instead of focusing on the fact that apps may be more convenient than the browser, because definitely there is that ease of access, user information is stored and saved, there is that customization aspect to it, marketers must start to really ask, what is the consumer trying to achieve? And then with that, which is the path of least resistance for them to achieve this? So a good example of the different app usage behaviors within an industry is within the news media category. We primarily looked at the news media because I think there's a lot of interesting information here. And here we asked respondents which channel do they turn to for mobile news consumption. We found that when it comes to consuming news media, the category for which consumers tend to access more through apps are sports news and business news categories. 42% and 40% of people who read sports news and business news respectively on their smartphones turn to their mobile app for their consumption activity, as you see highlighted here. However, we found that when it comes to news such as human interest news or political news, the results are mixed and shows that there's no strong preferences for one channel over the other. We believe that it's a factor of the type of news and occasions in which it's consumed. News that's consumed during possibly downtimes or on specific occasions may not necessarily make the case for users to commit to an app to view that content. And in such cases, the source of information may not be as relevant to the consumer as obtaining the information itself. So again, this takes us back to understanding the task and then the frequency of that interaction or those tasks. By checking sports scores regularly and keeping abreast of the day's headlines may make the task a bit repetitive enough that it would make it useful to download an app. And then while media, there are sources of news that's not as important to the user, it's more about reading that particular story that may not warrant downloading app, and a browser experience would suffice. And the same rule applies for convenience within this channel, right? In the case of news, we found that the top reason for downloading an app is easier navigation and real-time updates. People enjoy that ability to have those automatic sign-ins, have apps send news notifications, and again, that customization of their content. However, for those who use a browser to view news media, the ability to browse content from various publishers and search for specific news drives users to the browser channel. That flexibility to access news from different sources without really needing to commit to download an app for each source makes it the most convenient form to consume news content. So again, this is a great example of how convenience is really seen in different forms, and it's really within the eye of the beholder to understand and accept which channel is the most, I guess, confident channel and comfortable channel that they can use within that space. So we'll move on to explore kind of the different use cases for app and browser, specifically when it comes to the shopping journey. When it comes to what mobile channels consumers use during the shopping journey, it's important to take a step back to understand the mindset that consumers are in within the different stages of the journey. By breaking out the shopping activities to three key stages of research, purchase, and servicing, our study found that those consumers making research or purchasing decisions, which require heavy comparison shopping across different brands or different retailers, will most often rely on their browser to facilitate those actions. For activities centered around servicing, where consumers have an established relationship with a brand, the consumer tends to most often use their apps for that brand engagement. And we'll be sharing with you a few examples of this in the following slides. So in the first one that we looked at, that's the hotel category. In hotel, we asked respondents about the 3 activities people do in relation to research, purchase, and servicing. And we found that within each specifically research, it's comparing prices across hotels, purchase, booking a hotel, and servicing, logging into the loyalty program of a hotel. If you look at the charts below, we found that over half of those researching hotels will rely on their mobile browser to comparison shop for hotels. And specifically, you'll see 51% of consumers who research hotels on their mobile device will most likely turn to their mobile browser to conduct this research activity. When it comes to booking a hotel, a majority of consumers, specifically 43%, still choose the mobile browser to perform their booking. And surprisingly, among smartphone users, users who conduct servicing activities, such as logging into a loyalty program, the results are mixed, and you see the results there. In this case, we found that consumers like to leverage both the app and the browser for their activities, and usage between app and browser is split here at 42 and 41%. And I think that's because respondents who prefer the app for servicing actions enjoy having that personalized and one centralized space to view everything in that one location. So while it's intuitive to think that logging into a hotel loyalty program may not necessarily warrant the use of an app or downloading an app, and that's why we see an equal share or number of people using app and browser for servicing, I think it's also important to highlight that as product innovations come to market through hotel apps, and one comes to mind is the keyless entry, this type of functionality will drive more consumers to download and use apps. I think by giving users that effortless service experience that a lot of them tend to value, marketers in this space, particularly brands such as SPG and Hilton, are starting to pave the way in creating features that either address the needs and the wants of their customers, or are creating new needs that strengthen their value quotient to customers. The second industry that we looked at is retail. So in turning to retail, for those shopping primarily for consumer electronics such as smartphones, we see that there's an even split between respondents who prefer to use mobile browser and those who choose the mobile browser and mobile app in their research phase of the journey. 36% say that they use apps and browsers, and 36% say they just use a browser to research product information. What I think is interesting to see here with the split is that there are 2 dynamics, I think, that are at play. The first is that a consumer's loyalty to shop at a preferred retailer for their consumer electronics, which I think is definitely key. People like to go back to that same retailer. And the second one is the freedom to research different features and price points at different retail locations or sites. Looking down the funnel at the purchase phase, as consumers get closer to that purchase decision, nearly half, 44% of people say to have engaged with a mobile browser to make their purchase. But still, a substantial number of folks still prefer to engage with both the browser and app. And I think that's a cause because of their different preferences, right? So of consumers who access app for purchase, the primary reason is that ease of login again and being able to pay for the purchase with a credit card information saved. But within this retail industry, and because of the factors and the dynamics at play, we're really left with the impression that there's no hard and fast rule for when consumers choose to engage with an app during the purchase journey, app or browser during the purchase journey. The use of these mobile channels are seen as pretty interchangeable and even complementary. And I think what's important to consider and what marketers need to be focused on are A, obviously the top activities consumers are trying to achieve through that mobile channel. Specifically if they're reading reviews or comparing prices and features, possibly looking for promotions or discounts. And then B, it's about being present at those points of access, whether it be an app or a browser. And it's not a straight and easy path, obviously, from A to B, but without really understanding and grasping A and what your consumers are trying to do, marketers can't build a roadmap to B, and I think that's a critical insight here. Okay, the third industry that we look at, and it's the wireless industry. Wireless is an area in which is interesting because app and browser channel preferences flip at the research and servicing stages. An overwhelming majority of smartphone users turn to the browser to research wireless plans. Here we see that 66% of consumers research via the mobile browser. However, and not surprisingly, when it comes to managing an account, 67% rather, prefer to conduct these activities through the mobile app. It's reasonable to expect that not everyone who's looking for a wireless plan will download your app, and not everyone who downloads your app will be looking to switch plans. But I think what's important to consider in these two cases is the allocation of capital and resources here. If your industry sees a similar split, but your entire mobile budget is dedicated to building amazing features within your app, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you're not focusing equal attention and resources on your acquisition channel as you do with your retention channel, and the acquisition channel in this case is the browser. So looking at these figures and understanding the split or the composition could help guide your mobile investment considerations. I think another interesting piece to consider here is that when you're upselling current customers, it makes sense for wireless carriers or any marketer having a heavy app usage to focus on in-app promotions as well, as they're definitely a key channel for retention, and you can capitalize on those upselling opportunities with those consumers. Okay, and then the last industry that we looked at within this research is financial services, and within it specifically banking. And the findings here mirror exactly what we see for wireless. Those looking for information about different services and banking products turn to the mobile browser for this research. 60% engage through mobile browser, and as you see there, 26% engage through the mobile app. While when you turn to servicing, a whopping 70% go directly to the app to check possibly account balances or transactions and make transfers. Banking apps are a great example of how marketers can offer unparalleled service and convenience and value to customers. For customers, it's really an easy step process to get the information they want and they need from the app in an instant and effortless form. And also apps may also have a better interface with other software platforms that assist people with disabilities, so there's definitely a lot of benefits to apps here. For those working in companies that either operate within a similar space or deal with really secure information and transactions, I think an important component of the app experience and even the browser experience is offering customers that security on device. For either in-app experiences or browser, consumers still seek and place a high value on peace of mind for their personal data and personal information. And marketers need to consider those security parameters around both the app and browser and communicate to their users that their data, their personal information, and transactions are kept safe. Because if that bridge of trust is broken, then it defeats the purpose in offering that ease in transactions if there's no trust within that realm. And so that's why I think banking has benefited a lot from offering that service and people being open to having and doing those transactions via mobile. Okay, so we're near the end of today's presentation, but before we go, we want to recap some of the key points for the study and provide you with some next steps to consider while you start thinking about building your mobile strategy. So what are the main takeaways from this research, and what are the main takeaways for marketers trying to understand and build their mobile strategy? Consumers are unique. Their needs are very personal, and they approach tasks through different channels, which has led us to a few key insights from this research. The first is that there is no silver bullet to engaging consumers on mobile. And I think that marketers are really cheating themselves and their mobile investment by narrowing engagement to just one channel. Second is that mobile browser is obviously just as critical for the consumer as the app, especially when you consider that limited app bandwidth within the consumer's app repertoire. And then that learnings from this study show that when consumers choose a mobile channel, the criteria falls under three primary buckets, and that is task, frequency, and convenience. And convenience is really relative. It's perceived differently by others, and overall it's really in the eye of the beholder. Another thing that you want to consider from this research, one thing that we covered, is that apps and browsers can be seen as complementary to the consumer journey, and each channel serves a distinct purpose within the shopping and servicing process. So by understanding how those relationships play, it's important to not pinpoint it as adversarial, but really see how the two channels can build on each other and really elevate your relationship with consumers. And then lastly, and more importantly, I think it's not really about building an amazing app or advertising only through browser. In this case, we want to focus on context and analyzing how consumers within your industry use the different channels. And by understanding that and understanding how they use it within the purchase journey or shopping journey, you'll have the critical inputs for building a successful mobile strategy. So, while obviously in the long run, marketers will want to focus on having that balanced strategy by focusing resources on both app and browser, I think there are some key things that you can start thinking through today that will tie in well to the mobile mantra of acquire, engage, and elevate. The first thing is gather as much information. Gather as much information and data on your consumers as you can. Try to approach it as this anthropological study to understand how consumers research and purchase within your category. Are they loyalists or are they cross-shopping? What are they hoping to achieve on mobile? What attributes and offers in mobile are of intrinsic value to them? By understanding the nuance of the consumer funnel for your brand, it will guide how to best allocate resources to those mobile channels. The second one is engage, and it's about engaging them in the right way. You want to be realistic about how people choose to engage with you on mobile. Do you have something of value that you offer them on app, or is it more probable that they will turn to you on their browser? And how can you make your app or browser experience meet both the known and unknown needs of the consumers? Think about the keyless entry for hotel. And then lastly, you want to also understand what causes app attrition and how can you avoid it. So if you definitely had a good app strategy and had people download the apps, why are people not using them? I think that's the next phase of engagement. And then you want to use what you've learned about the consumer and how you engage with the consumer to then inform your acquisition and definitely engagement strategies moving forward. The third piece is elevate, and it's about really elevating your relationship and your role within the consumer's life. Apps provide a great platform to serve consumers and expand your interactions with them. And this is a good opportunity to start stretching your core competencies and start thinking outside the box. Use technology to redefine both the experience and the relationship you have with consumers. And to get inspiration from this, don't just look within your industry, But inspiration is definitely bountiful within mobile. So start looking at what other people are doing or other brands are doing within mobile. And then one final thought on mobile. I know that I'm definitely preaching to the choir here by saying it, but mobile is definitely not easy, and it's obviously different. And the longer we are engaging with it and adapting to it as a society, there are going to be new use cases, applications, and considerations that will surface. And so mobile is going to continue to evolve, and we all know this. So instead of just looking at it as a mounting challenge, it's a good opportunity to just start getting inspired, but by what mobile enables and some of the new opportunities it's presenting. So with that, I do hope this presentation has framed the way you should consider approaching mobile today and given you some food for thought in terms of strategies to think about moving forward. Thank you for participating in this presentation portion of the webinar, and I'm going to hand it back to Katie to open it up for any questions we have.
Great. Thank you, Alejandra, for sharing all of that with us. We got a number of questions during the presentation, but if you have any additional ones to add, please ask them now. So let's go ahead and get started. First question, do you recommend that we deprioritize our app if we fall into an industry where consumers rely more on the browser?
Thank you, Katie. I think that's definitely a core takeaway from the research is that we believe that both app and browsers are two critical channels of engagement for the consumer. So if your industry primarily falls into heavy browser category, I first try to understand why. What value are consumers seeing within the browser that they definitely go through the browser to use it, and is there a possibility you can harness that within an app? I would definitely turn to the framework of acquire, engage, elevate, specifically with acquire to gather that information. Another piece with this is that think about Amazon in this case. Generally, Amazon would be seen as a browser-heavy channel, but they made it so that they changed over to apps. So there's no hard and fast rules for how people will engage. It's really understanding what they're trying to do and providing the easiest method for them to do that, and that's going to be critical to that engagement. And so if you're looking at prioritizing either app or browser, yes, you want to prioritize the browser and browser spend. However, you don't want to neglect the app because that is also going to be that channel. So think about how the two channels play. Sometimes you're going to have an amazing app and people visit your app regularly, but they still find it easier to engage with you on browser. So you don't want to neglect one over the other. You want to see which is the best one to invest in and understand how they play together and have a great experience for both channels.
Great, thanks. Next question, what about ad spending? Is the app or the browser more important for impacting consumers with ads?
That's a great question, and I think that it's something that we really didn't touch upon in this research. In this installment of the research, we really wanted to hone in on the behavior, so we didn't focus our research on ad spend or mobile ad effectiveness. But there's definitely a lot of unexplored territory when it comes to understanding the role that ads play within the mobile channel. I think that what is evident by what we see with the new iOS feature with ad blocking is that ad blocking is definitely a valued function for consumers because people are tired of some of the current ad experiences that they have. And I think advertisers will need to take a step back and assess what ads are really acceptable and welcomed within the consumer space and which ones are seen as invasive. Because you have to think about the small screen that they're operating in. They're very sensitive to this information. And so it's important to try to integrate ads as much as possible with some of the original content. And if you can get the user's consent and it's given, the user will also be more receptive to the ad. So I guess to answer your question as to whether an app or browser is a better channel to reaching and impacting consumers, I think it really depends. Mobile attribution has been really hard to measure. So beyond that, I think it's important to just start by aligning the brand and the messaging and the ad with as much as the content the consumer is trying to concern, because you want to be relevant and engaging within the channel, and you don't want to advertise on an app that a consumer sees as kind of hostile, an attack of their space. So the most meaningful connections in advertising would be being present in areas where it's an open environment and a receptive space for consumers to accept your ad. And I think that's as far as we know right now with an ad, but I think that's definitely a hot topic within the industry.
Awesome. The next question is another hot topic. Does location influence whether someone will use an app or a browser?
Yeah, obviously location plays a critical role, I think, in engaging the way people, or in kind of looking at the way people engage with their mobile devices. We didn't primarily look into location within this research, but we did find within our survey respondents that people who engage in shopping activities on mobile, 85% do so from home, and I think it was around 28% say that they also shop while in the retail store for the same retailer. So that leads me to believe that in home, people are using either app or browser. It depends the channel that, that depends on that personal context again. And then in store, I'm assuming that it would be primarily with app, and the reason why I say so is that if they are within the retail store and using the retailer property, they're probably looking at promotions and deals, and I think that definitely comes through more so in app than in browser. And so definitely location is important, and it's an important factor, but I still don't think it is as important as what they're looking to achieve. And so again, it goes back to that personal context and what they're looking to do to understand which channel facilitates that action.
Okay, cool. One last question. So you aggregated the mobile properties earlier in the presentation, but did you see any major differences in behavior within the list of the properties?
Yeah, well, obviously there's definitely a lot of differences. If you remember kind of some of the top properties that I named, obviously Google, Facebook, Amazon, King Games, especially with the top ones that include heavy app usage such as King Games and heavy browser usage such as Wikipedia, we did see a lot of differences primarily with the demo breaks. So for example, with Wikipedia, the majority of app users we found to be male, while the majority of browser users are female. And we've seen similar skews in other properties where we see females have a tendency to visit via app and males via females via browser and males via app. And I think what's interesting here, and it definitely is not a blanket statement, but there could be something more that could be explored. Maybe females are more protective of their phones and their space, and so they're much more critical, or the bar is set higher to download an app versus a male may kind of do so more freely. And so I think there's definitely a lot of different behaviors that we can explore and look at, but I think when we aggregate the top mobile properties, it's really about seeing where the browsing population goes and what they do, and that's definitely not where we see a large variance, across demo groups or things, because it is just general usage behavior.
Perfect. Well, thanks for answering those questions for us, Alejandra. If we didn't get to your question, you can email them to us at digitalsolutions@millwardbrown.com. Thank you for joining us today for this presentation, and have a great day.